The night I realized she loved me was the same night I had absolutely nothing to give her. My wallet was empty, my job was gone, and my hope was hanging by a thread. I remember sitting on that cold park bench, my face buried in my hands, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. The city lights blurred behind my tears, and for a moment I thought about disappearing into the noise, just walking until the world forgot my name. And then, as if life hadn't finished surprising me, I heard her voice, soft, steady, and full of warmth I didn't think I deserved. Before we start, please subscribe to the Tears and Truths channel, like this video, and comment your thoughts. Daniel, she said, sitting beside me without waiting for an invitation. It was Maria, the woman who somehow saw something good in me even when I couldn't see it myself. Her coat was too thin for the weather, her hair damp from the drizzle, but she smiled as if she'd found exactly what she came for. You didn't answer my messages. I was worried. I wanted to lie, to pretend I was fine. But something about her eyes, honest, patient, impossibly kind, made it impossible. I lost the job, I whispered, and the rent's due next week. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore, Maria. Maybe I should just leave this city. She looked at me quietly, then reached into her small bag and pulled out a thermos. Drink this, she said, handing me a cup of coffee that smelled like home. And don't talk about leaving, not tonight. That's how she was. Simple, grounding, real. She didn't lecture me about failure or tell me that things would magically get better. She just sat there, letting the silence between us become something healing. When the wind picked up, she wrapped her scarf around my neck without saying a word. That moment, more than anything, made me realize what love really is. Not fireworks, not grand gestures, but quiet presence when the world feels cold. Maria worked at a small bakery near my apartment. Every morning she woke up before dawn to knead dough and frost cakes for strangers who'd never know her name. She didn't have much, but she had this strange faith in people, in goodness, that never seemed to fade. I'd visit her sometimes after my failed interviews, pretending I came for the coffee but really just needing her company. Once I found her sitting alone in the shop after closing, counting the day's earnings. She smiled when she saw me and said, "You know, sometimes I dream of owning a little bakery by the sea. Not big, not fancy, just a place where people come to feel better." "And what if it never happens?" I asked. "Then I'll still bake," she said, laughing. Dreams don't have to come true to make life sweet. I didn't know it then, but that sentence would stay with me for years. A few weeks later, things got worse. My landlord gave me notice, and the only job I found barely paid enough to survive. I stopped answering her calls because I didn't want her to see how far I'd fallen. But Maria, being Maria, showed up anyway. It was late, and I was sitting in the dark with nothing but a half-eaten packet of noodles. When she knocked, I almost didn't answer. When I finally opened the door, she was standing there with a paper bag in her hands and that same quiet smile. "I brought dinner," she said, stepping inside like she belonged there. We sat on the floor because I'd sold my furniture to pay bills. She unpacked 2 sandwiches and a small candle. "For light," she said playfully. We ate, we laughed, and for a moment my world didn't feel so small anymore. Then, as the night grew quieter, she looked at me and said softly, "You don't have to be ashamed, Daniel. I didn't fall in love with your success. I fell in love with your heart." I froze. No one had ever said something like that to me, not without wanting something in return. I wanted to tell her I didn't deserve her, but she just took my hand and squeezed it gently. We stayed that way for a long time, 2 broken people finding warmth in each other's silence. Months passed, and I slowly began to rebuild. A small job turned into a better one, and I finally managed to get back on my feet. But what amazed me was that Maria never changed. She was just as cheerful when things were bad as when they got better. We celebrated small victories with cheap coffee and late-night walks. She'd always say, "Happiness doesn't need money, it needs moments." One evening, after I'd finally saved enough to rent a new apartment, I surprised her with flowers from the street vendor near the bakery. She smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes, and said, "See? You never really lost everything. You just had to find what mattered." We didn't have a fairy tale romance. We had bills, exhaustion, and days when nothing went right. But we also had laughter in cheap diners, hands held in crowded buses, and conversations that made life bearable. She taught me that love isn't about who stays when it's easy. It's about who holds you up when the world feels impossible. Years later, when the bakery finally closed due to rising rent, I found Maria sitting on the same park bench where we first talked. I joined her, and we sat there in silence for a while, watching the city lights blink to life. "Do you ever regret loving me back then?" I asked quietly. She turned to me with that same soft smile. "Daniel, I didn't love you back then. I still do. The only difference is now you finally love yourself too." That night I understood the truest thing she'd ever taught me, that love built on kindness doesn't fade, it grows even through the hard years, even when everything else changes. Now when people ask me how I survived those days, I tell them about Maria, the woman who loved me when I had nothing, who saw my worth before I did, who believed in me quietly, without conditions. And sometimes, when life feels heavy again, I go back to that park bench with a thermos of coffee and 2 cups, just the way she used to bring it. I pour one for myself and one for her, a small ritual to remind me that love, once given in truth, never really leaves. Because she didn't just love me when I had nothing. She gave me something I can never lose, the belief that even in our lowest moments, we are still worthy of being loved.